we start creating these echo chambers where everybody you interact with, you're getting this curated view of how people see the world. And so you are in this upper quadrant being bombarded with information that says anybody who doesn't agree with you is a lunatic. All right, welcome back. I'm David Colarosi. This is Rob Patterson.
Hello, hello.
Rob, how are you?
Doing well. I want to first thank someone for some feedback I received. So in the comments after our episode that launched 2 weeks ago, someone mentioned that the sign behind me was off-center, it was cockeyed. Mm-hmm. And they were right. I realized it was cockeyed. So I tried to fix it. I think I've done a better job. It looks less cockeyed to me now, but I do have my computer at a bit of an angle. So does it look straight to you, or does it still look cockeyed, Dave?
Well, it's still I have some. There's so many insults here. I'm struggling to like sort of know where to go. It looks pretty straight.
Okay.
But I noticed that there were several people after our last video. Everybody's like, Rob, me and you both were in the gifted and talented programs, and you're so smart. And then I'm wondering, why is it that the smart guy in the gifted and talented program doesn't know how to use a level? Why are we? Do they not teach that in your gifted and talented program?
No, I used some sort of straight edge, but I used one of those. Have you seen those hooks? They're just hooks that go into drywall easier, and I think I did not mark it correctly. So I'm gifted and talented in other ways, and I would like to shout out that person who shares a more gifted and talented. I couldn't have appreciated that. Do you know how many people I showed that message to? That comment? A lot of people saw it. So thank you.
I'm glad
for that person. I appreciate it.
Well, Rob, I'm excited about today's episode.
What excites you?
I think this is an important episode. I think it's a timely episode, and it's one that I think you and I need to tread lightly on. So we in the past, whenever it's been political, you or I have taken a provocative stance, and our audience never seems to like that. I mean, Rob was almost disowned by his mother due to his stance one time. So we're not going to do that. We're going to talk through this. So the goal here is for us to get through this entire podcast and have nobody know who you or I voted for.
Right. So we are recording this, about a week and a half after the election here in the United States, where surprisingly to some and unsurprisingly to others, Donald Trump won the presidency.
I saw an image where they were comparing the electoral map from 2020 to today's, and they were saying, look at all of the districts where there has been 3% growth for the Democrats, and there was zero. There was nowhere where there has been any kind of growth. Everything has gone to the right. And I think if you're on the right, you look at this and go, well, no shit. It's been a long time coming. I knew this. We are the silent majority, right? And if you're on the left, you're going, where the hell did this come from?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody assumes that their view, their perspective is totally respected and appreciated by most people. We're just not saying it.
And widely held.
Widely held. That's right. Yep. So what we're going to talk about today is a concept called the false consensus effect.
Okay.
Have you heard of this before?
I'm not as familiar. I heard of it, but I couldn't tell you what it means other than the context clues of the name of it itself.
Yeah, it's a good context clues. So the idea here is that you, from a psychological standpoint, I would say this, there's a lot of research about why do we do this? Why do we have the habit of believing that everybody agrees with us? That's what the false consensus effect is. And you could say, in some ways, it's really maladaptive, right? If you are in a group and your perception is that everybody's in alignment with you, but they're not, doesn't that serve you negatively? Why would we evolve to have this characteristic? Well, researchers think that it actually serves us because it inflates our ego. It's all about self-esteem. If you move through the world and nobody agrees with you, right? You have this chip on your shoulder that makes it harder for you to integrate into your group. It makes it harder for you to integrate on a team. It makes it harder for you to speak up appropriately, right? It would be a derailer if you never had confidence around your views. So
Okay.
psychologically, we develop this way of interfacing where we go, whatever I think is right, and therefore everybody else agrees with me.
Oh, okay. Okay. Like so many things about us, this is yet another cognitive bias that helps us
Mm-hmm.
feel better about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I think it's really important when you think about election. So I think that this exists. I think it's interesting, but then the question is like, why does it exist, and why does it seem to be so prevalent in the United States versus it doesn't seem to be? People don't seem as surprised in their elections as we are. So I was looking at like,
Okay.
is there a role? What about us makes it so bad? Okay.
Makes this false consensus so bad. Okay.
Yeah, why do we have this? Why is this dynamic at play where Trump could win by? I mean, the Republicans, right? They won everything.
Yep.
They got the
Full
trifecta,
house.
full house as of today, I think. So
Yeah, I was reading about that this morning. Yeah. So we're
Yep.
recording this on a Thursday. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what I thought was really interesting in the research is it's tied to culture. Culture is very influential in the false consensus effect, but I think not in the way
Okay.
that you would expect. So how do you think culture would influence? Like, for example, if you had an individualistic culture like ours, or
Right.
if you had a collectivistic culture like East Asia, how would you think the false consensus effect would impact that or be influenced by that?
Yeah. I would say that the more collectivistic you are, the more likely you would assume that you would fall prey to this bias because you have, such a, like there's less information and less data that's
Yeah.
different. And so people would have a strong consensus about something that may or may
Yeah.
not be correct.
Yeah.
That would be my assumption.
Yeah. Like intuitively, I think that makes sense, but it's the exact opposite. So the
Really?
research shows, that in collectivist societies, because when you think about what does it mean to have an individualistic society, it means that you really care about yourself above others.
Yes.
In
So
a
like, yeah, United States would
yeah,
score
I care
high
about
on
me.
that. Yeah.
In a collectivist society, I actually care about the well-being of the people around me. I care about this whole society. So the data would say that the
Oh,
people
real quick.
yep.
Is individualistic versus collectivistic? Is it that I care more or that my focus is more? Because I've always thought about it as
Oh,
my focus is more on me. Not that I don't care about others, but that as an American, I'm more likely to just focus on myself, which I guess
that's
could mean that I
interesting.
care more.
That's interesting because I don't know. I've always thought about it like I don't care about others the same way, but maybe it's just I'm focused on it, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm equally interested
Yeah.
or
I
concerned.
mean, that's something we could. I mean, I don't know. We could look into that, but yeah, my sense was it was always a focus. Like my focus is on me or my family and getting ahead, and less on others, as opposed to I don't care about others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Whereas in a place like East Asia, China, it's not that maybe they care as much about other people, it's just that their focus and how they make decisions and how they move about their environment is more focused. They're taking a lot more time to understand, well, how is this going to affect other people more? Whereas as an American, I may be less likely to think about the impact that I have on other people around me.
Yeah. Yeah, but why would you focus on them if you didn't care about them? Like to me, those two things go hand in hand. If I
It
don't,
could, yeah. I guess I'm just reacting to like the caring part of it.
yeah,
Does it mean you don't care? Or does it
because
mean that you're just
it sounds
overlooking?
pejorative to you.
Yeah, that's probably it. It sounds,
Yeah,
yeah, pejorative. It sounds negative.
yeah.
Anyway, I'm derailing us.
But okay,
Move forward.
but what's interesting is in the United States, because we have an individualistic culture, we don't take any time to learn what other people actually think and feel.
Sure.
Whereas in East Asian countries, they are more invested, interested, focused, whatever the word is, in what other people think and feel, and therefore much more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
which is like
Yeah.
the exact opposite. I would have thought that it was the exact opposite.
So if I back my way into what you're saying, this exists more because there are likely in individualistic societies like the United States to be a lot more viewpoints available.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a way to think about it? And so because there are different viewpoints and perspectives, it could be easier for me to think that my perspective is the consensus. Whereas in a culture like China or others in East Asia, there are fewer viewpoints that are commonly held, or at least publicly held. And so it would be less likely that there would be a false consensus about them. Is that accurate to say?
That's not how I would have thought about it, but I'm not sure that it's wrong.
Okay.
There's two pieces. This is two ways that I have thought about it, but you can push back on me. One is, I think in collectivist cultures, there is a premium put on harmony, or there's a premium put on the group. And so to make sure that the group works together, they talk a lot about what they think and feel,
Okay.
and build a consensus that way. Whereas in the United States, I think we don't have that same premium
Right.
on it.
Right.
But I did not read that somewhere. That's just my perception around like that. So that's one part of it.
Yep.
But the other part of it could be, I think in the United States, we over-identify with our ideas. Like I think I have a view. For example, if you voted for Harris, you have a view about what that vote means and what people that think like you believe and feel, and right. There's a value judgment on that vote. Like we over-identify. It's not just, someone on the right believes X and someone on the left believes Y. It is someone on the right believes X and is this kind of person. Right. And someone on the left voted this way and is this kind of person. Like I think our opinions say a lot about who we are. Like we're overly aligned with our opinions, and it means more about who we are.
I would agree. My perception of this, though, is that it has grown to be more this way as of late than it used to be. So if you think of in the 90s, if you voted for Clinton or you voted for Bob Dole, my perception, and I was a kid then, so I don't know if this is actually true, but my perception was there was a lot less value judgment if you voted for Clinton or Bob Dole from the other side, saying that you're a bad person. You probably just had a different belief system about the role of government and society and things like that. Fast forward to now, I definitely agree with you that there's a lot more value judgment placed on who you vote for and what that means. I would say that value judgment is pretty strong from the perspective of a more liberal person to a more conservative person in the era of Trump in the United States. That's certainly something I've observed.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, and I feel like it's gotten more prevalent over the past 10 to 15 years.
Yes, I agree. But I think the fact that people are polarized in their views, I think it all sort of works together, right? We have been, and we can talk about the reasons why, but we've never been more polarized.
Yep.
We over-identify with our views and perspectives.
Yep.
And because we over-identify with views and perspectives, I think we then assume that anybody rational must think like us.
Yeah.
Like this is how I'm a good person. This is how I feel. So if you don't agree with me, you must be a bad person.
Right.
Right. And then that leads to more splitting. And then it leads to less conversation about what does this person actually think or actually feel.
Yep.
I think it's maybe a cascade of all those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So do you think that this is a consequence of, because the research would say, if you look up false consensus effect, most of the research is around culture, individualistic versus collectivist culture. Okay. Most of it is around, like a hierarchical culture is much more likely to have a hierarchical culture in comparison to an egalitarian culture. The egalitarian culture is going to have more false consensus effect. In a
We'll
hierarchical
have
culture,
more.
which is a counterintuitive, right? But the explanation is because of the hierarchy, no one can share their views and perspectives. And the assumption is people all have different, because no one's sharing, people all have sort of below the surface views that they don't share. So the assumption is everybody
Uh,
disagrees.
okay.
Whereas in our culture, a very egalitarian culture, I think right now it's very common for the left to share their views openly. So the assumption is, well, we must all agree with, like, because you can share it. And if you're not sharing it, then you must all agree with me. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, and two things are coming to mind. So it's almost like you have this graph. So on one axis you have hierarchical versus egalitarian, and on the other axis you have collectivistic versus individualistic. And
Yeah.
what you're saying is the United States would plot high on individualistic and egalitarian.
Yes.
So as a result, we are more likely here to
Yes.
fall into this effect on both sides of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I think
That makes sense.
that's 100%. So
Okay.
you have those two things going on, and then you throw into it social media, where what happens is
Yes.
now we start creating these echo chambers where everybody you interact with, I mean, you're getting this curated view of how people see the world. And so you are
Yeah.
in this upper quadrant being bombarded with information that says anybody who doesn't agree with you is a lunatic.
And
You
that's
know?
that was gonna be my second point that I made, because you said, like people on one side or the other. I imagine this happens on both sides. So if you're on the left, you feel like, yeah, you have, you know, this perspective, maybe more of a moral high ground. And so you assume that other people do as well. And if
Mhm.
you're on the right, particularly now, there are other reasons why you might have the orientations and
Mhm.
belief systems that you do. And you might view those who are more left leaning as however
Mhm.
you would view them about it. And I'm glad, Dave, that you brought up social media, so it sounds like you're going to take my soapbox and stand on it and talk about how terrible social media is. Is that right?
I was almost there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I am. I
I'm
agree.
glad I'm not the one standing on this soapbox this episode. And I am here for it. Let's do it.
So here's my question for you is, so I was preparing for this episode. And so I was looking I was looking for the map that showed, the movement to the right.
Yep.
And I was looking for the right. And then I came upon a video of Sean Hannity, who's one of the guys on Fox News.
Yep.
And he's making fun of the left for their reaction to Trump.
Okay.
And it just struck me that I don't know if there's a news source like Hannity is ridiculing and making fun of anybody on the left that disagrees with him
Right.
as being stupid, being over emotional. And the guy's never been happier in his life than his ability to now bash Jimmy Kimmel and bash everybody on The View. Like, he's loving life, right?
I imagine he is.
It's his moment in the sun. And then you have on the left, you have the same dynamic where people are saying, well, anybody that voted for Trump, this is all because of sexism. This is all because of racism. Jimmy Kimmel is on his talk show, which is supposed to be funny, and he is holding back tears. And you know what I mean? It's like, it's getting to the point where it's ridiculous that we don't have a place where we can get news that makes any effort to be objective. It feels like it's so extreme in both ways, on both sides. So well, first of all, do you agree with that premise? Do you agree that the news on both sides is exceptionally biased?
Uh, I agree that there are two sides. And
Okay.
I agree that increasingly people gather their news sources from polarized sources, locations, people.
Yes.
There are still very objective news sources that you can find. I would say, I mean, I look at news sources like Reuters. I remember looking at a long time, there was a website that you can go look up that says, hey, how partisan or not are
Yeah.
these different news sources?
Yep.
I don't know if this is true anymore because this is like 10 years ago that I did this, but Reuters a news agency where a lot of newspapers and stuff will get the reporting from. One of the most neutral, just telling you facts and data
Yep.
place
Yep.
that you can get. And it's not just Reuters, right? There are a number of different news organizations where that is, right? They're not editorializing. However, the things that you and I are going to talk about here today, the things that a lot of people will go on places like YouTube or on podcasts to listen to, are not that way. Right? The sources that we're going to talk about today probably are going to be those ones that magnify difference.
Yes. So when you think about social, so I agree with you. I used to think, when I was in high school, I remember, and I don't know if it's true still, but Fox News when I was in high school was by far the most popular cable news source. They dominated in
think they still
the
are.
late 90s.
I think,
Are they still?
I mean, if you, at least for cable news, I think they're still usually one of the highest rated. If I'd think of this, like MSNBC, Fox, and CNN as the three major ones.
And I used to go, well, why doesn't CNN do a better job of having a competitor to Bill O'Reilly? Like, shouldn't you do that? And then I think that they did, right? They had people like Don Lemon and Cuomo, and you could argue that sort of took that role, that mantle on the left. And I think my assumption is that this could not be, maybe I'm totally making this up, but my assumption is that that works well. And so what it means is that as an audience, while I can sit here and say, I wish that there was a TV show or whatever, a channel for Reuters, or I wish that was where I was getting my news, I am naturally going to gravitate towards the sources that are more provocative and more in alignment with my views. So
I think that's true of most people. Yeah.
Right. So it's like we're sitting here and we're complaining about the left right now is going, what the hell? How did I not see this coming? Well, the answer is you've made no effort. Did you make any effort to seek out objective news? Right? Did you make it takes work to go to Reuters, right? Did you go and listen to anybody on the right? Or did you continue to watch the stuff on the left and sit in judgment of the people on the right? And I think that's true for people on the right also, right? You sit on the right, you don't watch anything on the left, and you throw spit wads at people that are different than you. But because we're in that upper quadrant, we don't make any effort to really understand how the rest of the world views a given situation.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And I think there are so many, again, in a society like ours, there's so many different belief systems. And that's one of the benefits of living in a society like ours is a lot of those different belief systems can exist. Whereas, if you go to the opposite of ours, on that spectrum or on the graph I was talking about, if you're hierarchical and collectivistic, or maybe would it be higher? I guess that would be the opposite. Is there are a lot fewer viewpoints available.
Yes.
At least publicly.
Yes. Yep. Yes. I mean that I believe that's correct.
Yeah. And so there, there's going to be less dialogue in the public sphere about these types of things. You may just be getting one or two very high level types of belief systems here so that would be the downside. But in an election like ours, it would be less surprising potentially in those types of cultures for the outcome to be what it was here a week and a half ago.
When I was looking up the data around this, one of the things I found out about I learned about was this concept called the Overton window. Have you heard of the Overton window before?
Yes. And I don't remember where I heard it from, and I couldn't tell you what it is.
So this is the window of content or the window of policy discussion that is accepted by society. So the easy example would be if we were to talk about gay marriage 30 years ago, that was not an accepted, I think it was up until 2013 that even Clinton and Obama acknowledged that they were, that they voted for gay marriage. Before that, they were both against it, all the way to mid 2010 or something.
Yeah, right? I remember when Obama was running for president, at least he would kind of skirt the issue a little bit. And then it was sometime during his first term that he came out more forcefully for it.
So it wasn't in that window at the time. And so if you think about like public policy, if you are someone who's trying to make social change, you have to figure out like, how do I get this how do I make our conversation one that people are ready to hear? And so the way that social movement, I don't know if you call them social movement advocates interact here, is what they do is they try to move the window by being very extreme. So, for example, if I want to get people to recognize white privilege, what I can do is I can say, anybody who is white, we're all white supremacists, right? And what will happen is people that are white will go, hold on a second here. I am not a white supremacist.
Right.
I understand my privilege, but I'm not a white supremacist. And by going to the extreme, psychologically, you're anchoring people to sort of normalize the thing you actually care about. The thing people actually care about is people that are white understanding their privilege. And to get them there, you got to move that window by being extreme.
Being more extreme and provocative. All right.
Which I think makes sense to me. Like the idea makes sense to me, but if you think about it in conjunction with this idea of the false consensus effect and the significance of being polarizing in society, right? If society is polarized, it's really easy to judge the others. And so I wonder if what has happened is both political parties have perspectives, right? So you could, like, the ones that stand out to me would be on the right. There is the Roe v. Wade and how people view Roe v. Wade. And there are people on the right that have taken a very staunch view on that in an effort to bring the conversation back. I think the same thing is true for the LGBT population and discussions around transgender youth and how do we treat transgender youth. Some of the views are more extreme and they've got the right up in arms, but what we're really doing, or what they're trying to do, is just move that Overton window so we can talk about the transgender population. Does that make? I'm not sure if I'm articulating that well.
I think you are, right. So how do you make something that seems more on the periphery or extreme or kind of abnormal, or again, not part of the conversation? How do you then refocus people in society to say, all right, well, now this is in our window, this is in our experience, even if there's a wide screen, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's part of the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
For example, I remember, maybe this is 2 years ago, but I heard people on the right saying these liberal doctors, the doctors on the left, are wanting to kill babies while they're being born. And actually, if they are born, we're going to execute them and act like they were in the womb. And I go, that is there's no part of me that thinks that that's a reasonable concern or view. But we talk about that like that's possible, like that's happening, like there are these doctors that are murderers. And then we go, okay, well, let's go revisit Roe v. Wade. Because you've got me to, now I'm going to go, okay, I disagree with this idea that doctors are trying to kill babies while they're coming out of the womb. But we can revisit whether or not we should be pro-choice. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're yanking the window, or you can talk about gender affirming care in kids. That gets people up in arms. But once they're up in arms about that, then they go, but I don't have any problem with how an adult manages their own body. Right now we can. So
over time, it becomes just more normalized.
Yes. And so I think that, coupled with this idea of the false consensus effect, is we end up seeing the extremes that are there designed to move the Overton window. We label people with the extreme view, and then therefore all bad people. And then we're shut down, and we're not going to learn what people actually believe or feel. We're going to assume they're in this really extreme position.
Yeah. I mean, I think for that last example, that's the one I don't know that fits how I'm conceptualizing the false consensus theory as much, because I feel like that's not like a focus on that, or a focus on like, killing babies as they're exiting the womb is not designed to move the conversation. It's more designed just to like scare people. Right.
You know what? I think you're right. Because those examples, they're
not looking to actually have a conversation.
Right. They're not intentional examples to move. You're right. Let me think through that. Right. Because those are not, I don't know for anything, is there somebody in a room, plotting for how do we move the way people think about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
But I think the mechanism is the same, that the extremes move that window.
Yeah. I think
That's a good point though, Rob, that how deliberate really are people about moving that window?
well, and I think that's a good segue to going back to what you were talking about before. I was hoping you were going to take take a stand against social media, and you just didn't do it. So I'll go ahead and take it back.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I mentioned before that over the past 10 or 15 years that there's been widening differences in polarization politically, and I said it was during the time of Trump, and so that could be correlation or it could be causation. I don't know. But during that same period of time where you get the rise of social media and the easy availability of echo chambers and places for people who have a belief system that aligns with me and a belief system that aligns with yours to just get in the same spots, that helps. And then I almost think it reinforces, like, I know my wife and I talk a lot about my social echo chambers. Like the majority of people, and particularly my social group, my friend group, have a similar belief system to me. Now, I don't know if that's weird or different than it used to be, like even in the 90s. I have a sense that it is. Like,
Wait,
I go back
that it's different from the
that
90s?
it's different, that it's more separate now than it used to be, would be my guess.
Yeah.
And I would have to guess that part of that, assuming that's true, part of it is the fact that I can choose to interact with people more based on their belief system than I ever could before. That it's easier for me to A, know what the belief systems of different people are, and B, choose to affiliate more with them than I used to.
That I think I would not have got there. Like if you had asked me why, I think you're right. But what I thought was, well, I think the stakes are just higher now.
Why
But
are they higher now?
What?
Why would the stakes be higher now?
Yeah, I think the psychological. I think it sort of started during, and there's certainly overlap, with Trump and all that. But I think with COVID, I think with social media, I think that the perception is that if you're not with me, you're creating there's a worse problem. Like I think there's risk of more friction now than there ever was before. And I think if I listen to people on the left talk about people on the right, it is, we have just elected a fascist. We've just elected, someone that would be in the Nazi party, and oh my God, the world is going to end. And if you talk to somebody on the right, it's the opposite, right? If, Kamala is that way. She's actually the fascist, and we have these open borders. We're going to lose our country. And like, it's a very extreme, sort of doom and gloom everywhere you look. And so I think the anxiety caused by that makes people want to get on the side.
And the more engaged you are in those environments or echo chambers where those types of conversations are having place, the more likely you believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you're talking about, so maybe it's both, but as you're talking about, I was thinking, I wonder if we were to go back in the 80s, when was the Cold War? The 80s? Is that right? Do I
It
have
ended
that?
in the 80s. The Cold War
Ended
started in the
80s?
50s and it ended in the 80s with the fall of the Soviet Union.
So if you're in that time period, that's why he was in Gifted and Talented, by the way. But if you're in if you're in that time period, right, the stakes are pretty high. I'm sure your political views are pretty strong, but you have less of an ability, to your point, to prune your social group down to totally fit your perspective.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if we're just, we're talking about politics today. And if you look at, so again, going back to my geeky obsession with maps, if you look at election results in those time periods, it's not razor thin, right? Mm-hmm. Presidents who win the presidency win in general, from what I can remember, by a significant amount. Like,
yes.
I mean, like Kennedy's, and when he won, it might have been a little closer, but you get to Johnson, you get to Nixon, even,
Reagan was a landslide, wasn't he?
his second one. His second one, he won every state besides Minnesota.
I love that you know that. You just walk around with that knowledge in your head.
Well, that's also it's one of those things that just so you look at a map and you're like, oh my, can you imagine now a president winning 49 states? Like it's unfathomable to me that would even be a thing.
Yeah.
Or it's unfathomable to me that a Democrat like Bill Clinton would have won Louisiana or southern states.
Mm-hmm.
But he did. But again, fewer echo chambers, a lot more consensus among the populations of people. Now we have a lot less consensus, but to your point, it sounds like we are under the assumptions that a lot of people who think like us exist, A, and B, that we are the majority. I guess that's the other part of it that comes along with this, is that there's this false consensus. And I guess by saying the word consensus, it means that it's like a majority perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So given that, what do we do about it? How do you prevent yourself from buying into this bias?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this relates to the episode that we released on election day. This is where my head goes. Is if the question is how do you prevent yourself from falling into this bias, it's getting out of your echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding that there are people who have, which I think most people would say, well, of course there are people, like if I'm on the left, of course there are people who disagree with me. Like that's not going to be a surprising thing, but maybe the surprising part is the extent to which, at least at this moment in time, people disagree with a more left perspective.
Yeah.
And then maybe, in 2020, it would have been the same thing. It would have been surprising to people who were in a more conservative echo chamber that Biden would, I think it's correct. And, he got the most popular vote ever for a president. And so that could have been surprising for a lot of people who were like, how could you not vote for Trump?
Yeah. So I think you're right. So I think that the solution is, certainly in how you consume news or how you interact on social media, you should make an effort to not be in your echo chamber. I think the deeper level, or another part of it, is we have to find a way to decouple our identities from our beliefs and the identities of others from their beliefs.
Yep.
And I think if you could do that, if you recognize that you don't have to have a staunch view on something, and it's like, why are we driving why is our self-esteem being driven by our alignment with a view?
Yep.
That dynamic feels very unhealthy to me. And I think it's at the core of this issue.
Yeah. And it causes people to not be, I would say, the best version of themselves, right? It causes them to be a lot more tribal.
Yep.
And adversarial, which I certainly would say is a big part of it. I'm on Reddit, as many of you who've listened know, is the only social media that I'm a part of. They keep trying to feed me all these shitty channels about people being very adversarial, particularly around politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why are you feeding me that? Well, the answer is because most people stare at that.
Yeah.
They stare at that's what gets them going. Because it enrages them, it causes them to have a strong emotion, or they get really into it because it aligns with their belief system. So I would agree with what you're saying. And given the technology we have available to us and that most people engage in, that's not an easy thing to do.
You know what you could do? I have a solution for our audience.
All right, let's hear it.
You should ignore all of these super provocative shows, and you should listen to Shrink Space, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, notification bell even. All right. In that, you're telling the algorithm, I want mature, thoughtful conversation.
Thoughtful from two mature, thoughtful people.
Yeah. Right.
Or at least one.
Plumb like one of us is. Yeah. But I think but in all seriousness, I think that's the key, is you have to tell the algorithm, you have to tell yourself, you're not going to lose hours going down a rabbit hole of anger and anxiety, and instead be focused on figuring out what everybody thinks and what to try to find the truth versus the emotion.
Yep. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, good topic. I think this was a timely topic for sure. Nicely done.
Do you think we got through it without people knowing who we each voted for?
I found myself about 5 different times here wanting to dive in a bit. You're better at concealing these thoughts, I think, than I am, which might be giving it away kind of what my leanings are anyway. But I think you did a good job. We'll see after I listen to this if I did a good job.
Let us know in the comments who you think Rob and I voted for. All right.
And if it's the same or not.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.